Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And as we are talking about the consequences of a culture that has excised God from society and continues on this rapid course of depravity, as Romans 1 talks about, I mean, you have this progression of taking God out and then eventually God turns you over to your depraved mind. We're seeing the consequences in policy as well. And one of the best examples currently is a new look from Congress at women in the draft. And this coming from U.S. News. It says, according to a 2019 Pew Research Center report, 6 countries, Israel, Mali, Morocco, North Korea, a few others, draft women into military service. And other countries require women to register for the draft. And while the latest proposal stands little chance of actually becoming law, it is reigniting a long simmering debate about the draft and the role of women in it. And this is what they say. I mean, listen to this. Now, amid declining military recruitment levels, Congress is taking another look, and this is where women currently don't have representation. That's what they think this is about. I think this is a total consequence of queer theory. But let's bring in Representative Chip Roy, one of our good friends of the show from the great state of Texas. And Chip, I know that you are a solid Bible-believing Christian, and this is just yet another way that the secular left is trying to blur all lines between men and women and the differences, and to actually put women in the draft, and saying, as a lot of these news outlets are arguing and suggesting, is that this is now somewhere that women aren't represented. I'm okay with not being represented in the draft, but what say you?
Yeah, good morning, Jenna. I mean, look, this is something we debated pretty strongly a few years ago. You might remember when this was coming up, and I was one of the leaders in the charge to highlight it, bring it to the American people, and explain how this is a terrible idea, and frankly, how offensive it is. And this one for me is like the main or the significant hill for me to die on with respect to fighting my colleagues on it. And it's not just the radical progressive left. There are a handful of Republicans, both in Congress and generally, who will make and quote these ridiculous arguments, right, and just say, well, the feminists have brought this on themselves, and all the, if the women want to have, quote, equality, then, they need to be able to be in the draft too. And it has it exactly backwards. There's no actually good argument that I've heard. I'll have my colleagues that will say, well, Chip will never be drafted. That's never going to happen. And at the same time, they'll say something like, yeah, but we'll only need this if China, invades or we'll have a massive, land war with China. And there'll be conflicting arguments. And they'll say, oh, don't worry, Chip, women will only be put like manning drones. They won't be put on the front lines. But then go back and see the argument about China and say, well, we need the numbers if we're going to win, and we need to have people, including, women involved. So the arguments are always inconsistent. But for me, it's pretty simple. I don't want to be in a society in which we are drafting our women to put them into combat, to put them into the military to fight and serve in that way. Women have a long, rich history in defending and serving this country in a variety of ways, whether they volunteer in the armed forces today or whether historically, whether it was Rosie the Riveter or whether it was significant efforts on the home front, whether it was Abigail Adams keeping the house and home and family, when John was traveling and down at the constitutional conventions, all the things that he was doing. Those are the things that I think we got to remember about our rich history. I strongly oppose it. But remember this. Last week we had a vote in Congress, an amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act, might have been 2 weeks ago, in which we had a question as to whether or not we should make these standards be improved or be brought back to before they were watered down in order to allow for women to be able to achieve those standards. And we had 11 Republicans who voted against that. The amendment failed 205 to 216. So there are 11 Republicans in the House of Representatives who are saying to America they do not believe the standards ought to be what they used to be. The standards ought to be watered down in order for women to be able to achieve them. There is your problem in a nutshell, Jenna.
Yeah, and I applaud you for standing up and pointing out these inconsistencies in arguments. And you're right to point out that a lot of Republicans are basically just saying, "Well, fine, feminists. If you just want to have equality, then fine. We will put consequences on you," instead of taking the hard line and actually saying no to the feminists. But the question arises. Well, back in World War II, when this was kind of first suggested that maybe women need to be in the draft, it was limited to the one role of nurses that women could actually occupy. But now there are a lot of other roles that women have other than, on the front lines or in the foxholes and so forth. And so some outlets and commentators are suggesting that if Congress limited the draft to some maybe non-combat roles, then this would be an acceptable compromise. What do you think about that solution?
Well, it goes to the heart of kind of what I was getting at before. First of all, I don't trust these people, okay? I don't trust them to limit what the role is. I don't trust them to say that my daughter won't be put in combat. I don't trust them to make sure that my daughter would, frankly, be protected. And frankly, it's not their call. And this is one of those things that I think we need to start stipulating and saying a little more loudly, Jenna. Look, there is a world, a society, a community in which I want to live, and this isn't it. I don't want to waste a whole lot of time arguing the details and the intricacies of what my daughter can or can't do or shouldn't do in a draft. My answer is pound sand. You're not drafting my daughter. Look, that's just the world in which I want to live. We can debate. My daughter has a free will. If she wants to go serve in the military when she's an adult, she can go do that. But I'm not going to be a world in which, as a man, as a society, that we're going to look at our women and say, yes, we're going to draft you, put you in the military, and put you into service. People always bring up the thing with Israel, by the way. And first of all, remember that in Israel, they aren't drafted, to be put, they can go do a public service component. Also remember, Israel is surrounded and under constant attack, and they're also a very, very small country. But also, I just disagree. I just wouldn't do that. It wouldn't be my choice. And we actually have a free will as a country, and we get wrapped around the axle. We have to have these big, crazy, convoluted debates. And at some point, I just want to live in a country like that I want to live in, a community in which I want to live and be safe and secure and follow God and follow our beliefs and value systems, right? I mean, I want to have a public school where my kids can actually pray to God. There's nothing sacrosanct, so to speak, ironically use that term, about saying, oh, well, because somebody interpreted the First Amendment one day a long time ago, and because they reinterpreted Thomas Jefferson's, wall statement, that suddenly my kids can't pray in school. But yet we've accepted that for 60 years, and our country's worse for it. So I don't accept the premise. Why are we even talking about it? My answer is no. I don't mean that to you. I mean generally.
Yeah, and that's the correct answer. I mean, I fully agree with you. And, as Steve Deace, who was on in the previous segment, often says, we are not actually a nation of laws and rules. We are a nation of political will. And I think he's absolutely right, because as you just rightly pointed out, Representative Chip Roy, my guest today, that we have our laws. We have our supreme law, the U.S. Constitution. We have a First Amendment that protects the people's right to freely worship and to freely exercise our sincerely held religious beliefs, to exercise our religion. And yet, just because 60 years ago our Supreme Court has gotten that wrong, then somehow we think that type of precedent has to be compelled upon us today, instead of going back and saying, well, wait a minute, at the very inception of this whole line of precedent, or these whole lines of statutes from Congress, you got it wrong, and we need to go back and unwind all of this terrible precedent that has governed us for so many years. Why do we not have the political will on the right to stand up and make those arguments? I mean, you do, and Thomas Massie does. I mean, there are a few other people that do, but largely on the right, it seems like all we can do is just be a little less bad than the Democrats.
Well, this is a constant problem, Jenna, and it is, and I'm going to focus on this a little bit in the coming weeks as we kind of turn the corner heading towards the election. I want to make very clear, because I'm already hearing excuses for next January. about what we can and can't do, if we're even able to convince the American people to give us the trifecta of the White House, the Senate, and the House, I've already heard top-ranking Republicans in the House saying, well, we're going to have to be, modest in what we're asking for because we're not going to have 60 votes in the Senate. They're not even hiding it, right? There's always an excuse, right? Chip, you got to understand, this is what governing looks like. First of all, we don't govern, we represent. And in fact, we are not representing the people that sent us here. I was not sent here to increase spending and mortgage our future. I was not sent here to leave our borders wide open in chaos and criminals and terrorists and China being empowered. I wasn't sent here to have fentanyl pouring into our streets. I wasn't sent here to have, criminals, let out of jail and endangering our people. I wasn't sent here to weaken the military and make it woke. I wasn't sent here to have endless wars without, actually putting skin in the game, et cetera, and woke corporations and not going to the doctor of my choice. Yet that's what we're doing. And our offer in return, to your point, is milquetoast Democrat light. And last November, when I went to the floor of the House and I said, name one thing Republicans said they can do, or the Republicans did that we said we would do. And I have not been criticized by my Republican colleagues more in anything I've done than for that speech. The number of times they came into the conference meetings and all that, and they said, I can't believe you would say that. Why are you pointing at Republicans saying, name one thing? We can't control the Senate and all this stuff. I said, guys, the simplest answer is to do one thing. Pick a fight and mean it. Put it all on the line. Quit holding on to your election certificate like it's your lifeblood, like it's the most important thing on earth, that it's your precious, to quote Lord of the Rings. Let go. Do something with what God's given you and your ability to represent the people. Do something with your honor and your duty. Do something when you're in Congress to say, you know what, I left the mark. And when I leave Congress, it's not just going to be, well, I guess the country's on a, less bad slope into slouching into Gomorrah, to quote Robert Bork.
Yeah, and it is so true that people who get elected go to Congress at their campaigns. They say, oh, we want to do something, we want to create change. And then they get there and then they're so concerned about not getting reelected that they end up not doing the things that they said they would do. And your colleague, Representative Jim Jordan, I think that's actually the title of his book, like, let's do what we said we would do. And for the people who make all of these kinds of campaign promises, I mean, it's almost just laughable now, Representative Roy, that we know as a voting populace that campaigning is basically just bluffing. And it's just saying, here's what we'd like to do in a grandiose, perfect world, but then we'll make a ton of compromises. And yeah, there are compromises that have to be made. That's the nature of it. But if they're so concerned about re-election that they don't make the best decisions in the moment at the time on specific bills, then what good actually is it? And we have about a minute left, but I'll give you just that full minute to respond to that.
Well, look, I think as we look ahead towards November, I've had a few, and I'll come back and do it on another show. There's been a few races that have frustrated me in primaries. I think that Republicans are back to their old tricks, some of the establishment Republicans. But there's an overall movement, this is the positive side, right, where the American people are saying enough. And so come November, whatever happens, if Republicans are given the power, we need to do something with it. Or voters will remember, okay? The American people like Riley Gaines, people like Chloe Cole, people like Scott Smith in Loudoun County or Mark Houghton in Philadelphia, they're the ones taking matters into their own hands and fighting back. States are fighting back. People are fighting back. We need to represent them. We need to fight back if we want to be able to hold on to the majority and be able to carry this country forward.
Thank you for always fighting back and standing firm on the truth. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.